Welcome to another episode of While Supplies Last, the marketing podcast. My name is Candace.
And I'm Gabby.
And today we're here talking about none other than podcasting. Happy National Podcast Month.
Yes, happy National Podcast Month, although it won't be National Podcast Month anymore when this airs, but it's okay.
No, but still good information to share with everyone. And it's 1 month, but you can podcast all year.
True. You can podcast all year.
And we're going to explain a little bit about the benefits of podcasting for small businesses, our experience with podcasting, and how you too can podcast. All right. So, Gabby, can you explain to me? I mean, I know I was there, but can you tell the viewers and listeners, how did While Supplies Last start?
Yeah, so started last year in April of 2023. So basically, Matt, he wanted to have like a dedicated room for content marketing for our clients. And so the big idea around that was podcasting. And we decided, we should have our own podcast too. Like, we're a marketing firm, startup. We have a lot of information to share. We should have guests on, all that stuff. And it kind of just went from there. And it grew, and now we're in season 2. And yeah, that's pretty much it.
Yay, season 2.
Yay, season 2.
And I feel like from season 1 to season 2, we've learned quite a bit. Things have changed over time.
Sure.
But I think that's just like the natural discourse of learning about podcasting. And even though, yes, we help others with podcasting, it's a little different when you're behind the mic.
Yeah. Especially when you're not used to being behind the mic.
Yeah.
We're both like, I guess, more on the introverted side. And so I kind of got thrown into this, I guess, voluntold. And so it kind of forced me out of my shell and like forced me to grow more, which is good. I always like to grow and learn as I progress through my career. But this definitely had a steep learning curve for me. I definitely, whenever I'm talking to somebody, I like to listen, and then I'm mentally taking notes so I can ask questions later. Whereas when you're podcasting, you kind of just have to like come up with questions on the fly, ask questions like in the moment.
Yeah.
And that's what I've had to like learn and like get used to and just practice more.
For sure. Like, I wasn't voluntold. I wanted to do the podcast. I know there was a period where we were like, are we going to continue? And I was like, yes, let's do it. I had tried podcasting out before, prior to coming to Peachtree Rose Marketing. But it was a very different style of podcast. Mm-hmm. So my experience has been getting to, learn the differences and like switch up my style. And I know before, when I was like starting out podcasting on the previous one, I was able to take the stuff that I learned from there. And then I was like, okay, looking back, my tone of voice, the style that I was using, but like also I know I wasn't talking as much before. Mm-hmm. And like, okay, like you really got to step your game up now. So it's been really fun getting to podcast with you.
Stop.
and having on all of our like amazing guests that we've had throughout the season 1, season 2. Really looking forward to continuing. What's been like a highlight moment for you?
A highlight? I think having Christy on was a good highlight because, I've always like kind of thought about creative direction, and just being able to have that conversation with her was really inspiring.
Okay, yeah. If you guys haven't checked it out, that's the last podcast that we just put out.
Yes.
Maybe not after you see this, but I'm thinking about like time frames.
Yes, go back and watch the podcast with Christy K from Coasis Media. She's great, and it was a great conversation.
Yes. She was really fun to have. I'm trying to think who else. Like, Edward was really great to have. He had a lot of good information about like leadership in business. Um,
It's always great to have Joe on the podcast.
yeah. And I think some of the interesting part, like with Edward being on the podcast, I was in the room, but I wasn't actually.
Oh, that's true. You were doing like BTS.
Yeah, I wasn't actually hosting that episode, so I got to see it from like a different point of view, I guess. And I think wasn't that the very first podcast?
It was the second one. It was our second episode.
Okay, yes. So still very fresh, still very new, and like seeing how the podcast has come all this way.
Yeah, from where I started to where I am now is completely different.
Well, so let's talk a little bit about how podcasting can help businesses. That's one of like the main goals of us creating the podcast studio with Matt, was so we had a space for our clients to do content marketing and help small businesses in San Antonio. So what are some of the ways that you think podcasting really helps small businesses?
Yeah, well, first of all, it gives them like more content to put out. So when you're just looking at a small business, like maybe like at their website, or if you're looking like on their socials, you're not really getting a big picture of what they are, what they do. And podcasting, where they're talking about what they do and their business as a whole, I guess you can kind of connect to them more because you're seeing the person, like the actual business owner talking. Yeah. But also you can take that content and you can clip it. So you can put it on shorts like for YouTube, or you can put it on like reels for Instagram. You can make TikToks. So you can just repurpose all of that. You can improve your SEO with it. So there's really a lot of benefits to it, honestly.
Yeah, that's been one of the greatest things to see is like how it's helped with SEO for us as well. Just like because we can see the back end. Y'all can't see the back end, but we see it, like all the work that it goes into, like with your descriptions and stuff like that, and knowing that Google really likes video content. Mm-hmm. So yes, it's great to record audio, but the fact that we also have the capabilities to do like the 4K quality camera videos, and we're able to shoot this content and use it for YouTube long form and also like the shorts, seeing how that has helped us with like engagement on different platforms has been really great. I know another way that small businesses can benefit from it is like, okay, if you are a guest on a podcast or you create your own podcast and you start talking about, your industry and the things that you're, really passionate about, you kind of set yourself up to be like a thought leader, a industry leader. It helps share that knowledge. And then a lot of that content becomes evergreen. Like you're basically compiling all of the knowledge that you have and you can use it on your website. And it's just always going to be there. So like one of those things where you can refer people back to like an episode of something that you've talked about. Like for us, when we talked about like social media marketing, things like that, like we could always go back and refer people to like, oh yeah, we talked about that in our podcast, and that information has already been laid out. Also, you can take the information from the podcast and create blogs too, using like some of the key points in there, and then creating like written blogs that also will help with the SEO. So there's a lot of great stuff that comes from podcasting. It's not just all like for show and fun. There's actually, once you like have strategy behind it and you actually are using the content, you can see a lot of great benefits.
Mm-hmm. We should talk about the process of like getting guests onto the podcast.
Yes, because that has been interesting. I think so. Last season we didn't do as much of that, so I've really been learning about doing that this season. It's been really fun, like coming up with the concepts of like what do we want to talk about. I know also when we're like picking out guests, I'm also thinking back like the end result of the product. Mm-hmm. So a lot of times I'm like, okay, would this person be good? Would that person be good? What do we talk about? And a lot of times, obviously, we're gearing it towards business and marketing. Also thinking about the other person's, I guess, knowledge on the topics and their target audience as well, and trying to like collaborate our audiences together, because essentially when you go on someone else's podcast or you have someone on your podcast, that's kind of one of the things. It's like a collaboration, almost like a referral partnership. Like your audience is going to see it, my audience is going to see it, and hopefully they both get something out of it and that would benefit us both.
Yeah, for sure.
So we've kind of been diving into, I know we have like a whole list of people that we're really excited that we want to reach out to be on the podcast. And we've actually reached out to some of those people and gotten some of those people on the podcast.
And a couple more people lined up.
Yes, and I'm super excited about those people. To be continued.
No spoilers.
No spoilers. So how do you feel about like the process of getting the guests on?
Yeah, so far I think it's been pretty simple. I feel like most of the guests we've like known personally, so it's easier to like reach out and be like, "Hey, would y'all like to be on the podcast?" I'm not sure if we've had anybody say no yet.
Yeah.
Knock on wood.
Well, see, I think that's part of the misconception a lot of times that people, I think especially like small businesses or like people just starting out, they think there's going to be like these difficulties or challenges. And I think that's one of the reasons why we're doing this episode, is to kind of like demystify that. Like, it's really just as simple as like asking, because a good time, like, I know I was scared at first to be
Really?
like, yeah, to ask, like, but you know,
I guess for
rejection
season.
sensitivity.
Okay.
But like, what if this person says no? But like you said, we haven't had that problem. Like, most people are wanting to be a part of it. They want to tell their brand story, and it's been really great for the people involved. So I think getting that out of my head has been really the thing. It's like, you don't have to be scared to ask someone to be on your podcast. You don't have to be scared to go on a podcast. Especially the way we have it kind of set up is, you know, we like to take things and make them more conversational, not so like, strict. Like, we will ask questions and give guests questions in advance if they like that. But we still like to make it like lose a comfortable vibe. We're all about vibes.
Yes. Good vibes all around.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the process like has been pretty easy so far. Yeah, just reaching out to people, sending an email or asking them in person if we see them, like, "Hey, do y'all want to be on the podcast?" Everybody's been like, "Yeah, like, when do you have time? Like, I'd love to come."
Yeah. And that's really great, because then once we end up getting like the A-OK and we set the date, that's really when like the fun starts happening, and we start thinking of like, well, what are we going to talk about? What are the questions? And like I said before, thinking about the end product, a lot of the times I think about the questions of like, how is this going to help our audience? Like, what will they receive out of it? But then also going back to some of the information and knowledge that we were given at a conference, the end goal, and like reverse thinking that. So when I'm coming up with questions to ask, I'm thinking about, how does this going to make for a short or a clip for us to use, and trying to come up with the questions in a way that will get people engaged and excited to want to watch the full episode.
Nice. Yeah. Whenever we're like looking for people, or not looking for people, because like lately it's been people that we know or that we've met in person, I think of what they do, like what their niche is, and how we can like specifically talk about the business part. Because everything, no matter what you do, is business, honestly. So, oh, no.
Sorry. And I was going to say, well, and to that point, and you were saying we actually met them in person, I think that's what's helped us so much with the guests, having guests on and acquiring guests is like networking.
Yes,
Like we've
absolutely.
actually, every person that we've ever had on the podcast, like we've met them in person and built up sort of a rapport with them.
Hmm.
And then was able to be like, hey, do you want to be on the podcast? I mean, and it helps that they've probably seen some of previous podcasts, but like going out there, networking, talking with other people, because the like cold emailing someone, hey, do you want to be on a podcast? You're definitely probably going to get some, I mean, you would have to send them an entire like kit of why.
Hmm.
It's much easier when you've already met them, talked to them, and they kind of have a sense of like what they're going into. I know it probably could be a little bit scary if they don't know you and they're like, well, am I going to get dropped with some like crazy questions I don't know, or is this interview going to go left? That type of thing. So networking has always been like a key to us getting guests on the show.
Yeah. Plus, we kind of asked beforehand, like, hey, do you want some of the questions beforehand just so you feel like a little bit more prepared?
Yeah.
Some people say, yeah, like, send me a few. And other people are like, no, I just need to, like, wing it.
Yeah. Because then they're like, oh, I might get too much in my head if I'm thinking about it beforehand. But I think either way it goes, it flows really well. I do like the ones where it's more like we haven't really prepped, we haven't prepped them. So it's nice because you'll start off with a question and then again, conversational, it'll end up just like going down this other road. Sometimes we're like, okay, maybe we need to wrangle this a little back in,
Yeah.
but you end up getting some information that you would have thought of prior to.
True.
So, and then being able to ask like backup questions to some of the points that they make ends up being sometimes a little easier because then you're inquisitive and you're wanting to know more about the story that they're telling. And so that helps in that way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. What would you say are some of, like, the best platforms or, like, the best ways to market a podcast?
I think so far, like the best ones, in my opinion, I'll just go and say that. In my opinion, TikTok and Instagram. Instagram, very well. YouTube as well. So, YouTube, because it's basically the second largest search engine and it's owned by Google, like you definitely want to make sure that you have your podcast on YouTube. That's going to help you with SEO and people are searching, on YouTube. Then next up, I would say is Instagram again and TikTok because of the video aspect. That's where you're going to be able to do a lot of your, podcast clips and get people really excited about watching the podcast beforehand and then even being able to use that content afterwards to kind of speak on some other topics. Like in your content pillars, if you're going through and let's say one week you're like, okay, it's again National Podcast Month. And let's just say down the line, you're like, oh, well, I can reuse some of that content again. And it's on video. Video works well. Like, those are the best to me. Now, a lot of times also, we do a lot of business to business. So then I would also say LinkedIn. And so it just depends on what your podcast is about, your niche, all of that. But the top ones I would say are YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok have been the best platforms.
Okay. And you've seen, like, a lot of, like, good return from that?
Yeah, especially on Instagram. We get a lot of engagement. One, obviously, your engagement on Reels is going to be a little higher than just like your singular posts. But it's always nice, especially when you do like a collaborative post. So your audience is seeing it, their audience is seeing it. And since it's a reel, you're going to get more reach with non-followers. So you definitely get more eyes on it you're going to get more engagement going on. And just overall, the fact that it's a video makes it way more engaging. And I think because people like to see themselves, a lot of the times our clips are, yes, of us asking questions, but, video of the guests. So that gets people excited. They love to share it with their community, and then their community shares it like, hey, look at so and so, they're on this podcast. Like, I try to tell people you get a lot of engagement when you're using front facing or like pictures of yourself, actual, tangible things that people see of you, because people like to see that human to human interaction. So that's one of the reasons I say that the videos are probably the best for engagement, and using platforms where video is highly encouraged is definitely going to like boost your podcast marketing up a little bit, because people want to actually see themselves and see you. And then obviously when you add in the captions, that's great because you don't necessarily even have to have the sound on. And people are still going to sit there. They're going to watch it. So they're staying on it longer. All of that. So,
Yeah. Or sometimes they get distracted and just let it loop. Drives up the views.
Gotta love it.
Yes, gotta use some like catchy music, and that's what keeps them tuned in.
And that also goes into the whole like thinking about what you're going to ask before, because then you can start creating like hooks in in the questions to kind of get that like, this is the response that I want to get out of it.
Yeah, like a little offshoot from the main question.
Yeah. So that way your video has a nice good hook to get people really captured in. And then they're like, oh, then they go and they start reading the caption and that video is just looping. Looping in the background. Like love to see it.
Yeah, so I think we should talk about video editing with a word from our sponsor.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi there.
Hey.
How'd you get here?
I don't know. I just was working on editing a podcast, and yeah, this is weird. I'm very familiar with the studio, though.
Everyone, our video editor, Matt.
Yes.
Hello. Hi.
Also,
yeah, this is weird.
Also the owner of Peachtree Rose Marketing.
Oh, yeah, that too. Howdy.
But yeah, perfect timing. We've been talking about podcasting, and we were just getting into talking about post-editing.
Post-editing. Oh, man. Well, there's a topic for you for sure. So what all have y'all covered about podcasting?
We talked about how we started with While Supplies Last. We talked about the benefits for small businesses. We talked about like the SEO benefits and all that stuff. What else?
Getting guests on the show, recording.
Cool. So you want to know about post-editing. Well, couple of things to talk about. A lot of it deals with not post, so pre. So getting into before you're starting your podcast, making sure you got the right content strategy. All of that actually ties into the post-editing piece. So everything on the back end is as good as it can be based on how well the front end is set up, if that makes sense. So making sure you've got the right strategy and content going forward, the right guest for the actual compelling content is big. In video podcasting, making sure you've got the right camera angles, of course, is always a big deal. Obviously, making sure that, your equipment, whether or not you're using, we use a Rodecaster Pro 2 for our audio. We use Shure SM7B mics. Sony Alpha 6400 cameras, putting all our stuff out there. Just making sure that your equipment is good and well maintained. Those are all big parts of it. But then, afterwards, you can either, the way we do it is all actual post editing. So everything's pre-recorded and then we chop everything up in, a series of different software as a service platforms. But then there's, some podcasts where people will actually, edit in real time, which I'm not a huge fan of because you might miss some stuff. But yeah, that's a little bit about how we do it. Anything else? Specific questions?
Nice. We've been working on a project called San Antonio Podcasting. Would you like to touch on that?
Yeah, sure. So we built out our podcast studio a couple of years ago as, one of the biggest forms of our content marketing efforts. In that, we, dealt with a lot of the hurdles, if you will, or understanding, some of the things you don't realize getting into, being an owner or running a podcast studio. So to kind of help out other studios, we're building sanantoniopodcasting.com as a platform that's going to bridge a connection with other studios, because realistically, every podcast studio is going to have a unique vibe. It's not always the same for every show or host. So having those connections, great referral partners is a great strategy, but also just genuinely lending a hand and kind of raising the tides is a big part of it. So we want to have featured, studios that are great studios, use, top of the line equipment, have great post-production editing process, and ideally some form of marketing to be able to empower their guests and their shows, but also as a platform for featured shows. So San Antonio-based podcast shows, making sure that their content is available, search engine optimized, making sure it's not only SEO friendly but now AEO friendly. So answer engine optimization is the new buzzword that's going to happen soon if it's not already taken over the search engines and answer engines like ChatGPT. But yeah, raising the tides. Also a huge collaboration space online for guests. And if you're a podcast show and you're in San Antonio, you're looking to get guests, as we know with While Supplies Last, the marketing podcast, that can be tricky, and making sure you've got a consistent flow of the right types of guests can be difficult. So it's a great collaboration space for that as well. Yeah.
All right. I think that just about wraps it up. This has been our podcast on podcasting. So we're on Instagram, we're on LinkedIn, Facebook at peachtreerosemarketing.com. Also, if you go to our website, if you want to book a consultation, you can go ahead and do that. We'll reach back out to you and set up a meeting. But I'm Gabby.
And I'm Candace.
And I'm Matt, sanantoniopodcasting.com. Woo woo.
All right. Bye, guys. Thanks.
Bye. Thank you for watching.